This is always the portion of the show where I wonder if it's going to explode, and then we go live, and people catch me talking about wondering if I'm a capable streamer or not. Hey, look, it happened. So, yay, we're making it happen. Hello, everybody. This is Goddammit Zach. I am Skeeter Green. As you can see, there is no Zach. We may have just gotten rid of him. I don't know. He had a thing, but more than ably stepping in is our guest this week, Douglas Cole from Gaming Ballistic. Hi, Doug.
Hello, Skeeter. Pleasure to be on the show today.
So let's dive in. I mean, I've got a Kickstarter page up here. We've got Gaming Ballistic down there underneath us. Tell us about Delvers to Grow.
Okay, so Delvers to Grow is my latest Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game project. As it happens, Gaming Ballistic is the only third-party publisher to get the nod from Steve Jackson Games to independently produce material from powered by GURPS using the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game. That was kind of a long story that I won't necessarily tell, but in Gen Con 50, I'll tell a little bit. In Gen Con 50, after the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game box set came out.
Sweet.
There we go.
There we go.
I reversed, so it's going to take me a while to get this.
Okay, yeah. Well, then good job.
Yeah. Anyway, after the game came out, I'm like, this is really cool. I love it. I have a Dungeon Grappling 5th edition OSR module that I ran here in Gen Con called Lost Hall of Tyr. I kickstarted. I think I had already kickstarted it. And so I'm like, I have art, I have story, it's written. There's no risk here.
Yeah.
And it took a bit because they wanted to assess things, but eventually said, yeah, let's do this. And I said, okay, well, if I do it, let's go big and let's double the size of it. Let's make it a mini setting, not just a linear adventure.
Wow. You just jumped in with both feet.
I did, but
like a Viking.
That's right. But no, I wrote. One of the things was some of the feedback that I'd gotten on the adventure was actually it was pretty good. It wasn't as bad as some, but really the rails kind of show. And for a convention adventure, that's okay. But if you're dropping it into a campaign, not so much. And so it can be, right. But there were some shortcuts that I took to get to the grapple part because that was the premise. I had my big thing to date, and frankly, my biggest seller is this dungeon grappling book, which my tagline is finally grappling rules for D&D games that don't suck. That's not a high bar, but I feel like I've jumped over it.
We're going to get into your background with actual martial arts
a
little bit later.
Very good.
That means you have legit credit to write something like that.
So let's jump forward. So blah blah blah. I did a few Kickstarters, and now this is my 11th Kickstarter and my 8th book it's my 8th project for the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game because the Kickstarter is actually 5 books.
Oh,
it's we jokingly call it Build-A-Bjorn, which
I saw that. Yeah,
there's
cool.
There's a character construction thing. 3 small books of worked examples.
All right, I'm gonna start scrolling through this just to show it off a little bit.
And then there's an adventure targeted at the middle of the range of the point values that's there. So what's the deal? Why do we care about Delvers to Grow? When the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game was released, I believe that this decision was made that the answer to can my character do X was decided to be not only yes, but awesomely yes. So the character templates provided are action hero level. So basically you have a party of if not Conan the Barbarian, then something a little bit less. Maybe oh, what's his name? The Beastmaster, Mark Singer's character from
Yeah.
Beastmaster, Kai the Beastmaster. No, yes,
Who knows? We just called him the Beastmaster.
okay, the Beastmaster, but kind of a little bit, but anyway, big.
Yeah.
These are big heroes, big damn heroes, right? So the I think that what that means is that every player has a lot that they can do, and you multiply that by 4 to 6 people around the table, and you've got an archer who can shoot once or twice around, and once to the eye socket or twice to the vitals, right? And you've got these big damn barbarians with big damn axes who can cleave multiple times per turn, doing enough to one shot 3 people, and so it becomes a challenge to challenge them,
right?
Because GURPS can be swingy, and so it's not. Even though Sean has done Sean Punch, the GURPS line editor, did a masterful job of doing the sculptor job for what is GURPS. GURPS is a game design system. It's a toolkit. It is a whole bunch of stuff with which you remove everything that is not your campaign. And when you're done removing things, you have the ability to go to the table and roll and shout after you make your character. Okay, what Sean did is he did the sculpting for you for high adventure, high capability hack and slash games. That's the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game box set. It's a great set of rule books. It's tight, and it's really focused on keeping the fun. Okay,
that's awesome.
It's a great thing. Yeah. However, to create a 250-point character, if you don't know the system fluently, can be daunting. It's not impossible, and the template system provided, which is totally not race and class, but the template system provided helps steer you towards archetypical professions. So, yay, this is great. I love it. I write for it. It fits my Viking awesome setting well. However, there are a lot of people who like the 0 to hero. I want to start as a schlub and end up in action hero land.
Right.
But I want my story to be told at the table, not showing up already established.
Yeah.
And
you don't want the coming up part to be backstory. You want
exactly.
to actually do the coming up.
Play the game. Play the game, right? And so I proposed a while ago. Actually, I first laid the outline for what I thought was necessary to breathe fire into GURPS as a system for which you could proselytize, and not in a fanatic kind of ding ding ding, the end is nigh on the street corner kind of way, but something where it's a living, breathing, let's do this, and people are like, yes, I want to come play this because of these things. And I actually linked that in one of the comments in the Kickstarter. But the point is that it needed to be fast on the uptake, easy to sell to new people, and something that did not require a lot of system mastery to do. And so I laid out the requirements as a proper manager should. I laid out the system requirements or the documents for the structure for this. And then because I hate character building, so I had this book written for me, right? Because I don't enjoy the process, the metagame of creating characters, I found Kevin Smith, who wrote Nordlander Folk and Hand of Asgard, and said, hey, Kevin, let's do this together. And he's like, this is a great thing. I think that this is a good idea. And he set to work, and he turned in his final manuscript a couple of days ago. I've got it into preliminary layout. It grew, but I'm okay with that. It was supposed to be, about 32 pages. It's going to ship at 40. And
page creep happens.
But this is a book that I felt really strongly about doing whatever was necessary to make it happen. And It's really good. And the reason I say that is not just salesmanship. It's salesmanship, right? It's aliens. It's salesmanship. But it's really good. And I know this because we blind tested it. We handed the
Nice.
manuscripts to some of I have a Patreon with about 45 people on it. I handed the manuscript and said, go do something. And what they did was they took on the right side of my screen, the Forest End book, they took the map for this town, which has multiple walls as towns did back in 1,000 years ago. Especially if you've got dragons and orcs and blah 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 blah, you're going to have a walled town, right? So it has all this stuff, and so what they did was something akin to a DCC funnel. Everyone was going to show up at the game, be given a copy of the PDF, and they're my patrons, so they get advanced copies of most stuff. Right. And they were going to start creating a character. And as soon as they were all done, and I think there were 4, 5, or 6 of them, they would start play. And as these characters, midpoint characters, got killed by being horribly outnumbered and have to charge across a 200-yard field in the face of an arrow storm and cross the moat and climb the ladder in boiling pitch and all the bad things that happened during the siege, they would use the book to create fresh characters on the spot.
So in the cycle, after you drop, you're creating.
After you drop, how many turns? Does it live up to the hype? Can it really be done in 5 or 10 minutes, which is usually enough for 60 seconds a person times 5 people plus a couple minutes for the game master? So can you do this? And GURPS is a game where sometimes hey, I think I'd like to run a game to first session can be weeks long between scenario crafting and session 0. So you have shared expectations and actually making the character, and is he right yet? And can I have this advantage from this other book that maybe isn't really part of the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, which is self-contained, but it's really cool. And to be fair, we did that when I did the condensation of the grappling book, because my very first published book was GURPS Martial Arts Technical Grappling. I turned that into a D&D product called Dungeon Grappling, and then not too long ago, I condensed it from 50 pages to 8 because of the old line. I didn't have time to write.
Condensing.
It's seriously condensed, but it's better. It's better for it because all of these special cases got whittled away, and now there's like 9 things or something like that really form the core of everything, and everything else is a thematic variation.
Yeah, that's funny because that's how martial arts progresses as well. You take away the crap that is superfluous.
Right. And get to the core. But in order for Bruce, because it was always Bruce Lee who said that, well, there's many people, but Bruce Lee was famous for it. But in order for that to happen, he was a master at Wing Chun first.
Right.
So first you have to take the journey, and only then can you realize what's superfluous to take it away. Yeah. If you just show up and say, I know best, and I'm just going to start taking it away, you're going to miss stuff.
Yeah, then
unless you're just good, and most people aren't. Right. So in any case, so they started play, or they started making characters, and including staggered arrivals because it's crazy time, and it's crazy time, and people. Yeah, it's gamers. We're never on time, right? It's sort of a rolling start. But within like 30 or 40 minutes, everyone had a character and they started play. And the first thing that was interesting that I didn't expect is that the 125-point characters, this 50% of the starting level, were remarkably tough. They took it and they dished it out, and they could take a hit and stay fighting. And so they were not fragile snowflakes where you breathe a little hot air on them and they melt. They were tough. They were not 250-point Cuisinart, Sir Cuisinart and his Ginsu squad, but they were tough. But they did start falling, and I think the most that ever happened was someone had to skip a turn. But every time, either the character that said, well, I just took a serious hit. I made my health roll this time, but the writing is on the wall.
Right.
So they
Yeah.
started making character, and then the next time they died, they would just pull out their new persona, or if it was a surprise, like, oh look, there's a crit, triple damage, you went from hale and robust to -30, and you're just dead. Um, Maybe they'd miss a turn, maybe not, but it worked, and so there were 2 sessions of that that were done with ever improving manuscripts. And it was
And
really cool.
was this with strictly experienced players, or was there a mix of new and experience, or
Mostly these guys at least had played GURPS before, I believe.
so they
Um,
were at least familiar
they
with
were
it, but
familiar.
may
That is
not
true.
be
That is true.
well versed
Uh,
with the system.
yeah.
But that's an
Right.
excellent point, because even if you've played some, it was still pretty easy to pick up the mechanics
Right.
and make it work.
That's right. And the thing about it is what it is, it's a modular build system. You're going to
Mhm.
pick a flavor: strong, strength and dex, fast, mostly dex,
Right.
or smart, spellcasters.
Yeah.
Right? So three, and each of those categories has 4 professions associated with it. And they're pretty straightforward. You got your fighters, your holy warriors, your wrestlers, and your barbarian in the strong set. You got your swashbuckler fencers, you got your archers, you got your thieves and your martial artists in the fast set, and your spellcasters, your wizard, your druid, your cleric, and your bard in the smart set. And then you have 2 disadvantage modules, which are like picking backgrounds,
Yeah.
right? And they're thematic related. So even though each one might have 3 or 4 mechanical components to it, ultimately what you need to know is that you're the Dark Knight, and
Right.
lawful good
Okay.
is not lawful nice. And if you play the Dark Knight and lawful good is not lawful nice, you don't need to worry about whatever the mechanics are. You're Batman. You know what Batman is, right?
Right. Right.
Or
Exactly.
whatever, right? You're a street rat. Okay, I know what a street rat is. Right? I can picture it in my head. We didn't want to go too far over the top with superheroes, but we
Yeah.
joked about including the big blue Boy Scout, right? The
Perfect.
Superman persona,
Yeah.
where that kind of stuff. But there's a bunch of those, and you pick 2 because most people can't keep in mind 6 or 7 or 10 different mechanical things that they're supposed to do, but they can know that they are the old soldier
Yeah.
who's disowned by his former noble family.
The grizzled old veteran.
Grizzled old veteran, or he's a grizzled old veteran who was disowned by his family, and that's why he's a grizzled old veteran
Sure.
and not the head of a cavalry troop somewhere. Okay, 2 sentences, and you can play that character with as much or more fidelity. More fidelity, I would say, because you're not always looking down at your sheet. Have I played my disadvantage today? And so you make these 2 choices, and that sets your personality. You choose a basic template, a basic professional template. If you're higher point value, you also get your advanced, and that's like a certain number, certain core skills that point you towards the 250 point professional templates that are the action heroes in the dungeon fantasy. So you can see yourself. I don't want to use the word leveling up, but I'm going to use the word leveling up. Aliens. You can see yourself leveling up from
Right.
62 all the way up to, gee, now I've earned enough experience to look like these 250 pointers. But you've played that. It's
Yeah.
yours. And
You have put in the training time.
that's right. That's right. And by the time you get to that 250 point character, you know how to play it, and your game master knows how to kick your butt.
It sounds like a great system for convention play.
Oh my goodness gracious! So it's funny you mentioned that, and I know we talked about this before, but that's exactly what we're trying right now. One of my patrons, as I was talking, that we got our first retail order today on the Kickstarter. It actually was what pushed us over the edge to fund 5 each of everything on the screen, plus 5 each of the books that are on sale for the Kickstarter. So it's a big order.
man.
It's a
Yeah.
big order, right? It was
Yeah.
$635. And so we got our first one from Noble Knight Games.
Yay, Noble
And
Knight.
yeah, no, Noble Knight, exactly. No, and they're great, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they're great people. Um, and so we got that, and sorry, I was anticipating it because I had been talking to those guys ever since I was on the creator night on one of the Frog God meets. Um, anyway, so I was anticipating it. Their timing could not have been better. But I
Yeah,
was
because that
anticipating
just
it.
happened.
No, it happened today. It actually,
Yeah.
there was a $50 pledge, which took us to like $600 to fund. And then they came in and took us all the way to past the finish line.
Yep.
And still over a week to go. But anyway, so one of my players says, well, I'm going to go to my favorite local gaming store because they have game night, and I'm going to do a walk-up session. We'll do the meat grinder, walk up, use the book to make the character, and play. And if you're dead and if there's someone waiting, they can sit down and make their character and play. And oh my goodness gracious, I've been playing GURPS since 1989. So you know, it's like when people say, "Oh, Jews can kid Jews," right? I love GURPS. I've been playing it for most of my role playing life. But one thing that you never would expect is a walk up, create your character, not grab a pregen, and play in
work.
A rotating round robin sort of thing. You expect that with an OSR game.
Yeah.
Roll some dice, grab your sword, and have at it, right? You expect that TFT is the classic. The fantasy trip is the classic. I'm gonna make a guy. You're gonna make a guy. We'll beat the bejesus out of each other over lunch at high school, which is right. And we'll put it away. And tomorrow we'll fight again with new characters, and you get this gladiatorial thing going. But you need that on ramp, that fast time to table, to make that happen. And GURPS has never really been that game unless you are so experienced with it that you're already flying, right? It's like you don't need to taxi, you don't need to take off. You're already in the air. Now it's just, what do I do now that I'm here? So this book, and I'm coming at this a lot harder than I usually do. I'm usually the work will speak for itself, and I kind of had fun writing it, like if it's the stuff, my stuff, or, I think this is a good adventure. But this is the best onboarding and recruiting tool for GURPS that certainly has been written for 4th edition. The only other thing that I can think of that comes close was the old 3rd edition All in a Night's Work with Die Blackthorn solo adventure, so that you could learn the system on your own. And there's a good tool, right? And the fantasy trip has that. GURPS probably needs that. But with the Zero to Hero style, where it's with the Build-A-Bjorn style, where it's a couple of modules and those modules are fairly circumscribed. There's a lot of them. And so you can be whatever. But once the assumptions of making a character have been established as an author, as a game master, you can wrap your arms around the capabilities that your players will bring to the table and challenge them appropriately.
Right.
Because you can anticipate what might happen.
Well, I mean, that's you bring up a great point of the kind of the onboarding for these games. Everybody starts at the beginning. So you have to have a beginning. And I don't want to say you have to start at low level, because like with the points, you're starting at a different point, but you have to have an easy on-ramp to get into the game. You got to get rid of the barriers to play. And I mean, GURPS has some barriers if you've only just heard about the game.
So, and that's where I think that I want to spend just a moment on that, because I agree with you 100%. If you've only heard about the game and the wall of source books and all the different material and GURPS asparagus, which is kind of the old, right? There's so many source books that, GURPS World of Shrimp and GURPS asparagus and GURPS minutia that no one ever cares about and GURPS this and GURPS that. If that's all you've heard about,
Yeah.
it gets overwhelming. And the thing is that especially with fourth edition, which is the current edition
Hmm.
that's been out now since 2004. It's not exactly new anymore,
Yeah.
but they've done in third edition, the different world books and stuff would add new rules content to the game, new advantages, new this, new that. A character built with the martial arts book was qualitatively and quantitatively different than one built
Right.
before that book came out. It was the old splat book kind of thing.
Exactly.
And that's why they went to fourth edition and they said, okay, we're going to create a framework, and the books that come after are worked examples using that framework. That doesn't mean that they haven't improved or modified the rules a little bit here and there, like the imbuements book or whatever. Like, because there really needs to be a way to have any sword you pick up burst into flame because you're empowering the magic of the sword. It's not a magic sword; it's a magic Skeeter, and Skeeter turns every sword that he touches into, blade of itchiness, mosquito +3 or something. And so that becomes that wasn't doable. And so Sean wrote a book called Imbuements to do it. But the framework was there. Um, and like the martial arts for fourth edition that Peter Del Orto, who is also one of the co-authors for the starting adventure. And if you know Peter, he's run got to be a 10-year long dungeon fantasy campaign called, and he wrote the Mega Dungeons book, and he knows dungeon delving, and so
Right.
he was the perfect guy to write it. And I said, hey, we haven't collaborated in a while. You want to write a book for me? He's like, well, how about I collaborate with one of my players? And yeah, sure, great, awesome. And so I've looked at it. I just got it and just got a revision today, and it's going to be fun because it's a different sort of thing. The challenges that are speed bumps for a 250-point character, you're going to have to worry about. And so, in any case, the fourth edition game does a nice job of saying, here's the overall toolkit. You're probably not going to have to add much. You may have to choose what switches, because we have like the super action matrix gun battle. We
Right.
have the Audie Murphy charging the machine gun nest, which is cinematic because, oh my God, that guy should have died like 10 times.
Right.
But he didn't, and he did these things in real life. So cinematic, but believable and realistic. And then you've got, we're all going to die. We all suck. It's just a hopeless existence kind of, whatever. So,
Yeah.
but all of those switches exist. And so your setting is which ones do you flip? What the Dungeon Fantasy role playing game box set did is flip those switches for you. What my Nordland setting did was said, okay, yes, that, but here's a cosmology, here's a setting, here's a world, here's an expectation of culture, and
Right.
kind of a framework in which the dungeon delving lifestyle is somewhat plausible. And we sort of talked about it, but that gets into the Viking thing, because at least whether it's the Disney Vikings, so to speak, or the real ones, kind of the OG RPG party where you kit up, grab your long ship, go to some other place, kill things, and take their stuff. 90% of these guys were farmers and didn't do that, but the ones that did wrote the books and the sagas, and people told stories about them.
Yep.
And just like most people are not adventurers, most people did not go Viking. It wasn't a title; it was something you did, right? So most people did not do that, and most people don't go adventuring. But this is a world in which it could exist, and so it's a bit trope filled, because tropes are a shortcut to shared expectations.
Right. Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, we are writing and playing fantasy games. These are separate from the historical reenactments that may be much closer to actual history and how things were done. They're games. They're
Right.
fantasy. I mean,
They're right.
good God, you were just talking about some of the cities had extra walls so the orcs and dragons didn't get them. It's like, I don't remember that in my history book.
Right. Right.
So
Exactly.
there is some of this that people do need to take a step back and go, we are playing a game. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is uh, specifically for the GURPS mechanic. Since some of these things, like you were talking about, some of the switches have been flipped and
Yep.
some of the other things have been done, do you find that with a game system like GURPS that does have a plethora of switches, it's easier or more difficult to modify those to like remove the barriers to entry? Is
So it's I'm going to go with the Wing Chun Bruce Lee example again
Yeah,
because I think it's apropos. It's appropriate. The once you've done it, once you've written some books, once you've played a long time, whatever, you start to get a feel for what's core,
right.
and you're
Yeah.
no longer just God. I don't want to. I don't want to. Everyone can play their own way. I don't want to impugn,
Come on, man,
cast
you're going to
aspersion on
shit on
anyone.
somebody's fun. Just go for it.
Right. I don't want to shit on somebody's fun, but um, most people, if despite the fact that you can design a psychic blueberry muffin with a sword using GURPS, most people don't want to, don't care, and aren't
Right.
interested. And so by taking the bits of the game that are interesting and that do work and that avoid the traps, so to speak, that a newcomer can get into, like not putting enough points into weapon skills, or spreading themselves too thin, or not
Right.
spreading themselves thin enough, right? Oh great, you've put 962 points in sword, but you can't find the bathroom,
Yeah. No, you
right?
can there are definitely rabbit holes you can fall
Right.
down in any kind of system like this.
Right. And
Yeah.
so what this does is it absolutely avoids rabbit holes in character creation because it's core archetype stuff that years and years and years of play experience has validated that this stuff works.
Right.
And we actually have a couple of boxes. There are 6 unarmed combat skills in GURPS. There's judo, wrestling, and sumo wrestling, boxing, brawling, and karate. And we have a little box that says, hey, where's boxing and where's sumo? And the answer is, unless you really care about the particular things, punching in armor, which is sort of boxing, or slams and stuff, and those are rules that don't often see the table from the player perspective. Monsters slam you all the time.
Right.
Monsters are nimble in their big armor plating stuff because that's what they do. But you don't write rules for it. You just say they attack you at this skill level and have done with it. Players don't do that much. And so it's like we have a note there that says, look, this isn't in here. It is in the rules. If you really, really care, have at it, but make sure you're aware of what you're giving up in order to go down that path.
Oh yeah,
Um,
there's going to be the players who say, "Well, what if I want to specialize in jujitsu?"
have
That
at it,
that
right?
isn't,
Right.
specifically represented.
And that's actually a great example because in GURPS, judo versus wrestling. Judo is kind of throws and whatever. The
Right.
thing that judo lets you do in GURPS is defend without penalty against weapons.
Nice.
Judo and karate can parry weapon strikes at no penalty. Wrestling and brawling, if someone comes at you with a knife or a sharp stick or whatever, that's not what they're for. And so you're penalized. You're like a big defensive penalty to defend against a weapon attack. But once you have the basic capability to defend yourself while retreating, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
with judo or karate, wrestling is the better offensive skill. So you dump all your points in there so you can tie the other guy in knots. But when the guy comes at you with a pointed stick, you want judo to get out of the way and turn that into a throw or something. So then you can use wrestling to rip their arms off and beat them to death with it.
But Doug, that's not judo, that's aikido.
So
No,
so
I
no,
wanted to be
no. I
that
mean,
guy for a
your point
second.
is well taken. One of the things that's a bit tricky about the skill names is that, like, in order to do Aikido, you take the judo skill.
Yeah. No,
Um, right. Yeah.
I just wanted to
Right.
be that guy because there's going
Right.
to be a
Right.
dozen people on some
Right.
message board arguing that
Right.
tiny minuscule point and missing the
Yeah, there
forest.
can be, but one of the fun things about that particular thing is that if you look at the old manuals that have come down to us from 500, 700, 800 years ago, the concept of separating out grappling and weapon fighting and striking into separate things that didn't overlap. Like I think there's a line. I think I quote it in my book, but I don't think it was Fiore, but it was one of those guys who basically says, if you have two skilled swordsmen, the more skilled swordsman will win. If they're the same skill, the best wrestler will win. And if there's the same wrestling skill, the strongest fighter will win. And if there's the same strength, you're lucky. It's whoever's
Yeah, it
luckiest will
gets
win.
down to luck.
Right. And but it's like, of course, you learn how to come to grips with an opponent while fighting, because it's not like there was a referee that was going to step in the middle of a battle or duel and say, no,
Right.
no, 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 you're not allowed to do that. And if you read Hale's set, Master and Commander, the Aubrey Maturin 1800 set, there was a boxing match and they're throwing each other into poles and grabbing and kneeing each other in
Oh
the
yeah.
face and whatever. Right. So the concept of separating these out and having kind of a not well-rounded fighting thing is much more near modern era than anything that you might see in a world where an orc might show up and charge at you.
Right. So just so people actually know, and we're going to segue into the martial arts discussion since we've already been discussing it. Doug is one of the few people that I will absolutely let go on at length on this subject. Give us a little taste of your background there, Mr. Cole,
So,
and your fighting
so in
arts.
terms of martial arts, I've always been fascinated with them, and I started doing stuff in college a little bit of an eclectic Korean thing called Chai Ryu, which is kind of a combination of some Taekwondo and some Hapkido and some other things. I did a little Aikido in grad school. I did some fencing, just Olympic style fencing. But then I got into Hwarangdo, which was another Korean comprehensive style where you grapple, you fight, you do weapons, you punch, you do it. They get into like my wife is a second degree black sash. I had to stop. I injured myself. But my wife is an instructor, and they get into bone setting and Eastern medicine and acupuncture. So very comprehensive
Right.
stuff. But then after I hurt my neck, I could no longer grapple and throw and do this stuff as much as I would have liked. So I needed to do something else. And as it happens, I was writing. I got into a discussion with Tim Shorts, Gothridge Manor, when fifth edition came out, about short and long rests. And it was a very animated conversation where Tim was letting his opinion be known in no uncertain terms. At the same time, I remember thinking, well, goodness gracious, shields are kind of big. And it seemed to me that if you're going to hold a giant slab of something in front of you, that the +1 or +2 to armor class you usually get out of a shield in a lot of these systems didn't seem to be enough. But
Right.
I didn't want to, in a vacuum, just sort of say, well, I'm the designer and shields should be better. I'm like, well, maybe they're not that better. Who knows? I don't know. I've never used a shield. And so I started looking for historical European martial arts class that would teach me something about shields. And there are several of them here in the Twin Cities. A lot of sword and buckler. And there was this Viking thing, learned if, and as it happened, I was doing a rules test for what eventually grew into my oh, here it is. My Dragon Heresy game, right? So this is my original Viking thing done for 5th edition. 288-page hardback full color. It's a beautiful book. I probably lost $20,000 to $40,000 on it because
I
it was
one behind the green screen.
Oh, there you go. But it's a great book. Level 1 through 5. It only supports level 1 through 5 because a very well-established Kickstarter phenomenon and RPG publishing person, Rob Conley, put me in contact with him, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to do this," and he was like, "I shouldn't even say this, but please, God, don't. Why should anybody on your first project throw what looks to be money at least $150,000 project when you have zero track record to speak of? Please prove yourself in a useful way first." I'm like, yeah, all right, that's fair. And that's where, I mean, if you're going to ask a big dog for advice, you better be prepared to listen to it.
Yeah.
And so I did listen, and that's where Dungeon Grappling and then Lost Hall of Tyr came from. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I did it. And I did the Dragon Heresy book, and it funded, and I got a big offset print run because I hit that goal. But I was not in that at that point as a business, well, technically I had incorporated, but my business was not being run to live on.
Right.
If I broke even on my hobby,
yeah,
any given year, that was a win.
Yep.
I wasn't contributing to the household, but it was my hobby, and it was paying for itself, and yay team. And over the first 2 or 3 years that Gaming Ballistic was running, I about broke even. 1 year I did well, 1 year I did not so well. 2020 was a train wreck for everybody.
Definitely feel that.
But in any case, but by the time 2019 came around, I could see that, yeah, I could do this. I could really do this. But the point is that I was writing these rules, and Peter, as it happens, Peter Del Orto, the martial arts guy, and he's a guy who, speaking of martial arts, he went to live in Japan to do Shudo, to do full contact fighting for a while. So talk about someone who's been there, done that, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so he's like, we're going to test these rules. I'm going to test these rules. He's like, well, I want to be a cleric. What pantheon should I be? And I'm like, well, I just watched Thor yesterday, so the Marvel movie. So let's do Norse. Norse seems cool. And then I started reading about the mythology and getting into it and looking into the sagas and the stories and the culture and the OG nature of the, let's go into a ship and kill it. I was like, wow, this is astounding. And the more that I looked, the better it was. And then I found this school here in the Twin Cities, home of the Minnesota Vikings, so maybe not surprised. But
stretch.
The Vikings that we deal with have actually conquered something in the last 1,000 years. So, football team, not so much. It's my favorite bumper sticker that you see around here locally is, when I die, I want to be laid to rest by the Minnesota Vikings so they can let me down one last time.
Oh, yeah, savage.
It's a really savage burn, but
I do want to thank you as a Seahawks fan. Thanks for being that one game we can almost guarantee to win.
Anyway, so as it happens, this Ostfolk place that I go to is run by a guy named Arthur, who is really into the culture. He actually wrote all the AI algorithms, or a lot of the AI algorithms for Call of Duty.
Oh,
so
wow.
he's a PhD in operations research.
Yeah.
But he's also a traditional bladesmith, and he's traveled the world with some of his collaborators. He's measured and put hands on more artifacts, like shields especially, than almost anybody. And so he's just this wealth of information. And so not only was I learning about how to fight and how to use a shield, which wasn't what I expected.
Yeah.
But I was learning about the material culture, because behind me you can see a shield. I built it. I made it myself. But this one, unlike some of the other ones, This one, my father-in-law and I, we cut down a tree. We had some 30 or 40-year-old poplar trees that had reached the end of their life and they had to go. And so we cut the tree down. We had it, they couldn't do rift sawing. Had it quarter sawn because as it turns out, one of the things that you do when you make a shield is you rive it with an axe. After you cut it down, you split it into these little tiny thin boards with a freaking axe. I didn't do that. I used a power saw.
Yeah, that would
but
suck.
the grain of the wood
Right.
is super important for the robustness. And if you use flat sawn lumber, it's a lot less robust and it doesn't work like a shield should. And these things are really thin. They're
Plus,
like
they
that
didn't
shield.
have a lot of power saws,
They
in
did
Viking
not.
days.
They did not. And in period price lists, sometimes you'll see, sword, 20 gold pieces. We'll use something everyone knows. Shield, 18 gold pieces. Because the labor involved is you cut down the tree, you split it into boards, you hand it, you got to glue it, you got to do the blah, blah. It's hugely labor intensive, not that much different than getting the bog iron and reducing it into iron ore and then working it like the Japanese had to. It's really interesting. The Vikings and the Japanese have a lot in common. Iron poor, wood rich, warrior culture, and sword loving culture, despite being iron poor. And so there's actually some really interesting similarities in what they did and like pattern welding. And you didn't fold the samurai sword because you started with such great metal.
Yeah, no.
You started because you had crap and you need to homogenize it and work the inclusions out and whatever. So pardon me if I geek out on material stuff. I am a PhD in material science and engineering. It's what I did until last year. But then I got laid off and I talked to my wife. I'm like, maybe I can do this publishing thing for real. And we agreed and we set some goals. And if I meet the goals, then I keep doing it. And if not, then I go back to tech. Yeah. But if it's that easy, right? Assuming I can just get a job. But in any case, the point there is that the Viking culture was really interesting. And I found a school to inform the reality of that's not reality. Let me back up. We're going to inform the verisimilitude, the seeming of reality. The gods walk the earth in these fantasy worlds, right?
Right.
You can get married to a goat-legged, horned, red-skinned, totally not tiefling, but not only do you know that this creature has a soul and is beloved of Asgard and has a chance to go to Valhalla, whatever, you don't just suspect it. You know. Because you pick up the Odin phone and you're told, no, I got 3 of these guys in my iron yard right here. They're good, right? So the sense of we don't know these things and whatever, you know, because the clerics talk to the gods. So in a world like all that, you can have a lot of fun embracing some of the more stereotypical tropes of the culture. And make the setting feel real. And one of the things that I've done and that I ask my authors to do, I don't know if we've got the page count to do it in the book that Peter is writing, Peter and Marshall are writing, but because it's adjacent to the Citadel at Nordvorn, it's in a hex crawl area called the Hunted Lands. It's the first in what's hopefully a series of adventures in that area. But because it's there, you just got to look to Citadel at Nordvorn, which is a pure setting book. It doesn't have any linear adventure path, but it's totally filled with adventure seeds. And it uses what I still think is just the coolest device. And I can improv games over and over. This is a relationship map.
Nice.
That connects all of the characters, and you've got red lines for hostile relationships and green lines for allies and black for neutral. And so if you interact with a character, the game master can just look at this map and say, who likes you because you're talking to Skeeter? Who is going to start planning your death because you're talking to Skeeter? And who doesn't care? And so then you're approached by NPCs who want to be your allies, and then they and the bad guys try and kill you. And you can do all of that because by walking through this little spider web, you send little vibrations out,
Oh yeah.
and you have enough stuff to come react. So anyway, so Peter doesn't need it. So Peter and Marshall don't need it to run their game, but it's there. But one of the things that I do in all of my setting books is I have a big list of festivals. I don't know
Festivals are fantastic.
Festivals are fantastic. They're the greatest way to take a beginning group and without saying, okay, please allow me to read you page 13 through 34 of this story.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
How that you no. Death by exposition, right?
Yes.
And so you can't do that, but you can get all of that with a festival, competitions, which tell you what they value.
Right.
Who's doing the speaking at these things, so you know who's important. And you can get undercurrents and plot lines, and you understand what's good and what's bad. And, oh, we're going to have a wrestling match, and someone casts a spell and you slip and you fall down. Is that cheating? Or is that, the silly barbarian forgot to ward against the grease spell? Well, that doesn't tell a lot about the setting and how you interact with that setting. And so by doing that, and there's always a festival. That's what I didn't appreciate this until I started writing this thing. There was some sort of festival or holy day 60 times a year in this medieval Europe that we were doing. Every week there was something. And many of them are still around in one way or another. Equinox, solstice, there's 4 big ones.
Yeah.
Actually, I have my Nordland calendar beginning in March because that's the beginning. That's the beginning of spring.
Festival season.
It's festival season, and the winter is over, and we didn't die.
Yeah.
Yay, let's party.
Well, and that's one of the things that is, some of the background information that is more realistic for these Middle European fantasy campaigns. There were festivals. I know
freaking time. Yeah, that's right.
For Frog God Games, when I was working on Bard's Gate, there was very specifically a calendar. And there were festival days and, end of the week, hurrah, we survived a week. Regular people were happy to survive on a weekly basis.
That's right. And why was war season and raiding season and all kinds of idle time was in the summer? Because it was just too damn hot to do anything. The crops had been harvested. No, I'm sorry. The crops had been in.
Right.
And it was just too hot. So what do? You go kill things and take their stuff, or you compete in games, or you raid, or you do whatever. And that was a different time, though, you have harvest and you don't go to war in harvest, because if you go to war during harvest, then
everybody
you don't
starves
eat
to death.
Right. And so some of that it's just interesting to weave it in, because it means that you can walk across a landscape and it doesn't feel like you're walking through the Northeast with strip malls and everything's the same. And it gives you it's just fun, and getting into some of that and has been really illuminating, but it also makes the settings really come alive.
Yeah, it definitely gives them depth and flavor that's more than we're going to walk to, rolls dice, this town.
Right.
And it is exactly the same like last town, except maybe it's this town at night.
Right. And the other part of that I found interesting is that when you look at sort of the population maps of some of these medieval settings, you have a town, and town is like if you have a town of 5,000 people, that's a really big settlement. There were some outliers that were tens, hundreds of thousands, but they tended to have unique
Right.
circumstances around
Right.
them, or they were Chinese, because there were some shockingly large cities in China and Japan in times that the Europeans were recovering from plagues and stuff. But in any case, you have town, and then you get out of town, and town is small. Town is hundreds of yards or thousands of yards, and maybe there's a wall, and then you get out of it, and there's just farmland,
Right.
and then there's nothing, right? And then there's 2/3 or say a lot of it is it's just space, empty
Yeah. Yeah. I
space, and
mean,
that's the wilderness.
yeah. If you're lucky, there's some trees, but we can't go into the trees after dark
Right,
because there's stuff that lives in the trees that we don't see, but
right,
we hear.
right. And just to I want to say, first of all, the Delvers to Grow product and the point values and the lower point make that scary. One of the problems, or not problem, yeah, one of the problems with 250 point characters strolling through the woods, very little mundane can challenge them.
Right.
Right, a pack of wolves to a 10th level D&D party is not even a speed bump. It's fur coats on the move.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not even worth it. As but a wolf or a bear is darn scary to a beginning party or character, and should be, especially if you play wolves smart.
Yeah.
But what that does
Pack
is it
attack.
brings the challenge back. And so the Delvers to Grow product is kind of fun for that, because it's a different kind of challenge that the game master can say, oh, well, I want to challenge my players, so wolves are following you. All right, now you're scared. Now you're worried about
Yeah.
your resources and your pack animals and whatever. However, despite the fact that I've been going on and on and on about Vikings and my setting and whatever, because it's awesome and everyone should buy the stuff, Delvers to Grow, while the art and the jokes have a lot to do with my setting, because that's what my license lets me do, it is absolutely portable. It's not, this is the Nordland fighting module. It is a fighting module. 25 by, combat reflexes and fearless are not setting specific.
No, not at all.
Those are just right. So this is, of all the things that I've got, with the possible exception of Fantastic Dungeon Grappling, that 8-page condensation of the grappling rules, with the possible exception of that, this is the most portable, usable, fast on-ramp to any setting that you want to play in the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game. It's just quick.
And it removes a lot of the barriers to entry.
It does.
I think I'm definitely going to have to check this out.
Yep. And you have a copy, right? I
Yep.
forwarded you the
Yep.
the.
I have an advanced copy of the PDF because I'm special. Well, Doug, you did a masterful job this entire interview. I feel like I could have just sat back and done nothing. You did great. You had engaging stories. You sold the book. We even went up some money while we were on the stream. So thank you, people out there. On the YouTube chat, we got some happiness about you geeking out about the metallurgy. I think this was a great interview, and you brought it back to sell the product again. You're a superhero, man.
I appreciate you having me on. I'm very pleased that we funded today.
Yeah, that
obviously.
was great. I was really happy to see that.
The other thing is that, so from here on out, we're into stretch goals. And even if I say so myself, the stretch goals are pretty cool. It's worked examples of fully fleshed out NPCs. And if we get to the next one is Bandits and Outlaws, because who doesn't want their bandits to have character? Why are they a bandit? What are they looking for? What will they do? What are they afraid of? And grab them, and that becomes your adventure. And I even have it's going to be a modification and an update, but I never just do the same thing twice. I always move it on. But I did this Bandits and Outlaws book for the fantasy trip, and so I have the art, but it's black and white. So I'll
Nice.
color it, make all the characters in Delvers to Grow, and so they'll be kind of this, thematically the same, but they're going to be 100% ready to raid.
Yeah.
And so there's that. We're going to have some wizards, and then the last goal is pirates and raiders. So, and that will include ships. Like here are 4 ships: a merchant ship, a longship, and 2 small pirate vessels with a full crew that work together as part of it. So it's not just, oh, here's a ship and here's 12 clone NPC Vikings.
Yeah.
This is Olaf, and that's Bjorn, and Ilsa is the commander, and she is feared by everyone. And she's got her, maybe it's a lover, maybe it's a best friend, maybe it's whatever, but a druid, and that ship goes where the druid says because he controls the wind.
Nice.
Right? So could be anywhere, you can never predict. So that one doesn't exist yet, but we need to get to 1,000 backers. All of my stretch goals in this campaign are based on backer count.
Nice.
Not money.
Good way to do it.
And so the basic $35 pledge gets you PDFs of the 5 books that are initially, and any stretch goal. The physical pledges include physical copies of all stretch goals as well, and of course PDF. If you're like, wow, this is really cool, I want to try GURPS, there are at least 2, and I think I'm going to add a third, starter packs that Steve Jackson Games is letting me offer the box set and the Monsters 2 book as part of the Kickstarter. So
awesome.
Right. So if you want to try it, I'm going to offer I've already got kind of an all-in Nordland, so you have a setting to play in. But what I don't have is, here's the box set, here's the second monster book, and the Delvers to Grow book, and that's it. And so I'll put that on there over the next day or so, so that you have something where if you want the box set and you want to try this on ramp, you can do it without having to get all of my Viking stuff if you don't want to do that.
Cool. I like it. All right. Everybody, get in on this, buy it, tell your friends, get some backer count, get some stretch goals. It's always nice when you can rope your friends in and then you get more free stuff.
Right.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Zach, for not being here. Good night, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thank you again, Doug.